Hello and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Nazia Iqbal and here's a look at the stories for the day. Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the scrapping of the controversial farm laws after persistent protest. Modi had hailed the laws as a watershed moment when they were passed last year, with the government arguing that they would bring private investments and FDI into the farm sector. However, the government was unable to bring on board a section of farmers and caved into the political pressure arising from their protest. Now, let's get a better understanding of what comes next.
In a surprise announcement on Friday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said the government would repeal 3 controversial agriculture laws after 358 days of non-stop protests by farmer groups, mainly from Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh. The decision came on the occasion of Gurpurab and a few months ahead of the assembly elections in Uttar Pradesh and Punjab, the hotbed of the agitation. The bills were passed in September last year in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha by voice vote, and farmers have alleged ever since that the laws were made to help big businesses. Since then, the government's 11 rounds of discussion with farmer leaders did not yield any meaningful results. So, what are these 3 contentious laws that triggered India's longest ever farm protests? The Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act gave an additional option for farmers and traders to sell and buy outside the designated mandis. States and commission agents feared loss of revenue if farm trade moved out of mandis, whereas farmers feared this might have eventually led to the end of the MSP-based procurement system. The Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act provided a framework for contract farming. Farmer organizations said the law was framed to suit big corporations and would weaken the negotiating power of farmers. The Essential Commodities Amendment Act removed stockholding limits on certain agri-commodities, except during extraordinary situations. The opposition said the amendment would have benefited the holders, letting them dictate the terms, while at the same time hurting farmers and consumers. Now that we understand the basic outline of the laws, let's delve into the implications of their repeal. While the protesting farmers might celebrate, a section of experts views this development as a setback for the farm sector.
So these reforms were not to reach the global market where the farmers could get better access to technology and also remunerative prices of the global level. The second setback will be on investment in agriculture. You know that agriculture needs huge investment, especially in the back-end land labeling, irrigation, especially the surface irrigation, and in the front end, especially the post-harvest, need investment for developing markets, agro-processing, storage, cold storage, logistics. So we need a huge investment in agriculture. Public sector cannot make such big investment. Private sector was to enter for such an investment, and the withdrawing these laws will adversely affect the investment in agriculture. The government has already created an agri-infrastructure fund of 10 lakhs crores of rupees. I think it will have implications on this, that it will not be used as government was expecting. And third major setback will be to the foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, especially for agro-processing sector, and also export, including the contract farming, delivery mechanisms, creating new kinds of markets. So these are the setbacks to the agriculture sector overall.
Despite the general consensus that the agriculture sector is sorely in need of reforms, not all experts are of the view that the 3 farm acts would have been the right solution.
Central Act on contract farming somewhere permits or legalizes land leasing which I believe can never be part of contract farming arrangement, because in contract farming, farmer is the producing entity, the sponsor or the contracting agency or the corporate cannot cultivate farmers' land under contract farming. But this has been done under this, and one state government, which was trying to amend its Central Act in order to protest against it, ended up writing in its amended act bill that if the company employs its labor force on farmers' field under contract, then it should withdraw the labor before the end of the contract duration or period. So I thought that was one big violation of the state level acts on land leasing, which most states have in place along with the Land Ceilings Act. The other is the Farmer Produce Trade and Commerce Act, which is, you can call it APMC Mandi Bypass Act. So here also one of the provisions like requirement only of a PAN card for any buyer to go and buy farmer produce, I thought was too much of relaxation, because this didn't have any counterparty risk guarantee, which APMC system has. So by default here, we ended up creating two markets in one place in each area, instead of trying to integrate markets. And the fear was that if one market has very unequal playing field, that there are no buying charges in the new trade area, then we may end up diminishing the importance of APMCs or killing them altogether. So there are a lot of design flaws which were creating a lot of trouble, other than the fact that there was this federal issue as well, that the central government should not have enacted on issues or subjects which are in the domain of state governments.
This also might not be the death knell for agricultural reforms that certain sections believe it to be. After the repeal of the Agriculture Acts, government officials told Business Standard that the focus would now shift to convincing the states to adopt the model APMC laws, which were promulgated some years back.
So basically, my contention is that it should be left to the states, and states over time, in fact, have been doing reforms. So it may be gradual. So the central level intervention may not be necessary in the agriculture marketing. So that's my view.
However, this doesn't mean that the center is off the hook as far as the protesting farmers are concerned. On Friday, Bharatiya Kisan Union leader Rakesh Tikait said that the protests would be withdrawn only after the three contentious legislations were repealed in Parliament and legal guarantee on minimum support price or MSP for crops made. The demand for MSP as a legal right could pose a huge challenge for the government.
And my fear is that because the first step of using political consensus to bring about reforms was not taken, we are in this rather messy situation of dealing with a demand that is even more problematic. Given the fact that the state or the central exchequer is constrained financially, given the fact that agriculture, after all, is a state subject, and agriculture needs more investments rather than a kind of price guarantee for a small segment of farmers who come to the markets. Remember, over 85 to 90% of Indian farmers don't come to the markets to sell their produce. So an MSP is an instrument that benefits a very small segment of farmers, but a very, very powerful vocal segment of farmers. So the real tragedy would be if the first step that was wrong, in the sense that reforms were introduced without political consensus, and if that leads to a government that is struggling with meeting with another demand, which is financially more challenging, that would be a bigger problem going forward, and a big challenge for the central finances.
Whatever your opinion might be about the farm laws, one thing is undeniable. For now, the central government has lost the narrative on deep structural reforms. And Time alone will tell whether the states will take over and bring in the much needed changes to the farm sector.
The lesson from this episode should be clear. No matter how strong the government might appear, major reforms cannot be pushed through without taking all stakeholders on board. Well, coming back to your living room now, you could be one of the many who switched to DTH from cable. The lure of better picture and sound quality made people choose the broadband from space services over wide cables in recent years. The cable industry also could not keep pace with the clutch of technological shifts introduced by the government. So, what is the current status of the cable industry and what is its future outlook? This report answers the question.
Cable operators in India have been going through a tough time. Nearly a decade ago, when the government mandated digitization of cable TV, those who did not want to spend on new set-top boxes gave up on their subscriptions. Another blow came in 2019 when telecom regulator TRAI's new tariff order complicated channel selection and raised prices. Let us see how the industry is coping with the changes now. Data from the Broadcast Audience Research Council shows that as many as 210 million households in India owned a television set in 2020. This is a 6.9% increase from 2018 when there were 197 million TV homes. But the number of cable homes in India has fallen from 115 million to 100 million. According to a report by credit rating agency CRISIL, DTH subscriber base substantially increased in FY20 as the cable TV subscribers shifted after the implementation of the new tariff order. This was because cable operators were struggling with integration and rollout challenges. At the end of 2020, India had about 70 million DTH customers. This is in addition to DD Free Dish, which is estimated to have crossed 40 million subscribers. On the other hand, cable's share of total television subscribers has steadily declined from 63% in FY15 to 43% in FY20. The pricing parity mandated by TRAI led to a 30 to 35% increase in cable TV tariffs, which eroded the price advantage it enjoyed over DTH. This also meant that the average revenue per user of DTH and cable TV has been converging quickly. Mihir Shah, the Vice President of Media Partners Asia, told her columnist Vanitha Kohli Kandekar that cable as a standalone video service is on a structural decline. No major foreign investor has entered the sector, though 100% FDI is allowed. Cable industry expert and media veteran Ashok Mansukani stated that it is a stretch to say that the cable industry is dying. We spoke with him to understand why.
The average number of cable homes has never been 130 million. It was around 100 to 105 million. Cable has been static. If I see myself as a viewer, certainly in the last 2 years, I have watched more OTT than I have watched cable. But there are people who are absorbing both. That is, they watch cable, they also watch OTT, and they watch it on a smart TV. Really speaking, cable is stagnant, but cable is not dying. On the other hand, cable has serious issues. TRAI has also agreed to postpone the implementation of NTO2 to April of this year. That is April of coming year. See, the costs would go up if you do not select your channels with care. Fears are created in the mind of the cable operator that the customer will go away. So the way I see it is, at least for the next 5 years, cable can safely focus on customer service being the first and foremost criteria to keep its customers. People are used to cable. People have been watching cable for 25 years. They would be happy to watch it as long as service improves. Most people are happy to have cable at home because cable still costs between 300 to 400. But a Netflix costs 800, then you have Amazon Prime, then you have X, and then you have Y, and you have Z. As far as rural India is concerned, there is a very large, shall we say, number of millions of customers who take free dish of Doordarshan, of Prasar Bharati. Obviously, they don't pay for cable. So the challenge there for the cable operator or the multi-system operators, how can I bring this customer who has got used to a free lunch, who doesn't have to pay a single pie, how can I bring him into the pay channel in such a way that not only I, the MSO, benefit, the broadcaster benefits? So those are challenges which are what I call business challenges which have to be dealt with. So today, if you see, hardly 15 to 20% of the entire cable base is covered by broadband supplied by cable operators. Cable industry has to now take advantage of the new AGR regulations that have come in October and quickly, very quickly, build up a cable broadband base to create a sticky factor for the customer to stay with. Because if today we are going to have a situation where cable says, I am only supplying cable, and broadband is supplied by telecom, and telecom is allowed to supply television, then you can see that the challenge for the cable industry could become much larger than it is.
We can safely say that while OTT platforms are a cause for concern for television, they become a major threat only when their costs come down significantly. With increasing options like phone, OTT platforms and free dish capturing customers' eyeballs, cable operators are looking at new ways to grow. The industry has now been playing up internet as their core offering, as video consumption pattern is showing a gradual shift from TV channels to streaming services. Therefore, to reinvent themselves, cable companies will have to deploy a broader set of products surrounding the internet connection. The television industry revenues are estimated to grow at a rate of 7% annually to Rs 84,700 crore in 2023. This presents an opportunity for the cable industry to embed itself further into the households by providing related services and increase its share of the pie.
While the country is steadily shifting from TV channels to streaming services, cable TV as a standalone video service is evidently on a decline. Let's now switch to the market channel. Inflationary pressures and rising COVID-19 cases in developed markets are haunting investors. Besides, PM Narendra Modi has decided to withdraw the 3 contentious farm laws in the forthcoming parliamentary session. How will all these developments affect the markets? Should investors be prepared for further downfall, or will the markets see a bounce back rally? Watch our next report to know more.
The benchmark Sensex index erased over 1,000 points or nearly 2% last week to end at 59,636. The Nifty 52 declined 2% to settle at 17,765. This sell-off was triggered as a flare of new COVID-19 cases world over made investors cautious on the global economic recovery. Meanwhile, back home, multiple rating downgrades by global brokerages coupled with margin pressure faced by India Inc. in Q2 worried investors. Let's go to Narendra Solanki, Head Equity Research Fundamentals at Anand Rathi Shares for a quick market recap.
Benchmark indices fell by about 2% last week, but stocks has seen much larger fall as we come to close under the earnings seasons. There are 2 primary reasons for it. Firstly, global uncertainty around factors like inflation in developed markets, leading to changes in stances in rates, sharp commodity prices rise, and increase in COVID cases in developed markets, and China real estate crisis or uncertainty, which one can say was unknown by markets since past 2-4 weeks. Secondly, as we entered results on back of historically highest GST data, better consumer sales, be it durables, auto or festive spends, result season started off with high expectations on domestic front. However, though larger companies reported decent revenues, but due to various challenging circumstances faced in operations, be it supply, raw materials or logistic issues, faced higher costs which could not be passed in such short time, and hence margins were seen contracting, which added to the already benign and not so positive global concerns.
As trading sentiment is expected to remain subdued this week too, given the absence of fresh triggers, analysts suggest investors accumulate quality stocks at lower levels.
We think most of the sell-off has already happened, as we see in data currently, and market should look to stabilize going ahead. I think current sell-off or correction provides a greater opportunity to long-term investors to enter in good companies. From fundamental perspectives, the margin pressure is expected to gradually resolve starting Q3 FY22 as companies pass over costs, and since revenue growth was satisfactory, hence there should not be much of the problem in same.
Overall, central bankers' commentary on interest rates and inflation, bond yield trajectory, foreign fund flow, and monthly futures and options expiry will steer the indices this week. in the primary market, the 1013 crore rupee initial public offer of Go Fashions will close today. So far, the issue has been subscribed 6.8 times, with retail investors' portion seeing a subscription of 24.6 times. That apart, Tarson's products may also debut on the bourses later this week. In another development, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday announced the repeal of 3 controversial farm laws. The bills will be withdrawn in the forthcoming session of the Parliament. G. Chokalingam, founder and CIO at Economics Research, doesn't expect markets to react to the announcement, as he believes it is a political development rather than related to markets. Madan Sabnavis, who is chief economist at CARE Ratings, believes the decision to repeal the bills is unfortunate, as the laws were progressive and had the potential to benefit farmers and commercialize the sector. Overall, with no major events lined up this week, benchmarks may remain range-bound. As per tech charts, the Nifty index is expected to trade within a range of 17,150 to 18,000, facing stiff resistance at 17,850 levels. The BSE Sensex, on the other hand, could find support at 58,950 levels, keeping the overall trading range between 58,550 and 60,600.
Ever really liked your Zomato order and wanted to visit the restaurant you ordered from, only to realize that the said food joint has no dine-in facility? Such restaurants are called cloud kitchens. Today, there are several food brands leveraging digital branding and marketing strategies to create customer loyalty and brand recall. Let us decode the cloud kitchen trend and find out why it is gaining momentum in India.
From Fasos to Biryani by Kilo, today there are multiple food brands on Zomato and Swiggy which have carved a niche for themselves. These brands have a loyal customer base who have come to expect food of a certain taste and quality from them. But these restaurants don't have dine-in facilities, they only take online orders. These food joints have come to be known as cloud kitchens or ghost kitchens. Dine-in restaurants were badly hit during the pandemic as people stopped eating out. A report by the National Restaurants Association of India said the restaurant industry shrank 53% in the fiscal year 2020-21. In such a time, cloud kitchens found several takers. Such businesses are characterized by low entry costs because they don't require waiters, front desk staff, parking space, etc. But it is not that easy to establish a successful cloud kitchen business. Rebel Foods co-founder Kalol Banerjee said this in a recent interview with Business Standard. He said companies have to spend on marketing and digital branding to ensure brand recall. They have to also pay per order commissions to food aggregators such as Zomato and Swiggy. So the money saved on rent is spent on other heads. A cloud kitchen is similar to that modest eatery in your neighborhood, whose kitchen looks out onto the street, which displays its kebabs on skewers to lure customers. Here you see a queue of customers waiting for their takeaway orders. As Rebel Foods' Kalol Banerjee pointed out, India's cloud kitchen and restaurant market is vastly underpenetrated when compared to the US and China. High rent, lack of space in big cities, and a rising middle class will drive the growth of cloud kitchens in the days to come. In terms of the gross merchandise value, the Indian cloud kitchen market is expected to become a $3 billion industry by 2024, up from about $400 million in 2019, according to Redseer Consulting.
That's all we have for you today. We will be back with more news and analysis in our next episode. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.